Good evening, Little Masters, and welcome to episode 105 of the Prancing Pony Podcast, where tonight we party with the elves.
It may be poor fare, but it's good enough for us.
Yes, it is.
Folks, we'll head over to the common room in just a moment, but first, I'm Sean Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and I'm here with the man of the West, who is subtle and quick to anger, Alan Sisto.
Anger? I'm never angry. What's your problem, man? What are you talking about? All right.
So quick to anger.
So quick. And very subtle. Mm-hmm. It's a different kind of subtle, folks. Remember we talked about subtlety.
You're like Saruman subtle, Feanor
yeah, like
subtle.
Feanor subtle, exactly.
There's nothing subtle about your delivery.
No, most assuredly not. Folks, today we take a much-needed break in the woody end before continuing on our journey with Frodo, Sam, and Pippin.
And we also get a nice little astronomy lesson, too.
And some cool first-stage name-dropping.
Yeah, but before we get into any of that, we should probably have our next installment of This Week in Tolkien History.
Indeed we should.
All right, well, this episode is releasing on December 9th, and we've got some really great moments to commemorate today.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to start by going all the way back to 1914. The weekend of December 12th and 13th of that year was the famous Council of London. Now, that was a reunion of the TCBS, or the Tea Club and Barovian Society. That's Tolkien's closest group of friends from school. At his friend Christopher Wiseman's home in London. And Christina Scull and Wayne Hammond described this weekend in their chronology by saying, "The friends know that they will soon be involved in the war and want to regain their former closeness. They spend much of the weekend sitting around a gas fire, smoking and talking. They all have ambitions in literature, art, or music, and feel that they gain inspiration from each other." Now, John Garth puts it really beautifully in Tolkien and the Great War when he says, "They dubbed the reunion the Council of London as if it were a council of war. In fact, it was a council of life. War did not intrude, despite the enlistment of G.B. Smith and Rob Gilson. In Rob's words, the four of them were absolutely undistracted by the outside world."
That is wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
And this weekend was a crucial inspiration for Tolkien. Seems to have been one of the key moments in his decision to pursue writing his mythology.
Yes, it was.
In 1916, in a letter to G.B. Smith, it's letter number 5, Tolkien would later say, "I cannot abandon yet the hope and ambitions, inchoate and cloudy I know, that first became conscious at the Council of London. That council was, as you know, followed in my own case, with my finding a voice for all kinds of pent-up things and a tremendous opening up of everything for me. I have always laid that to the credit of the inspiration that even a few hours with the four always brought to all of us."
Wow.
Yeah. Wow, indeed.
It's just, you just see that's kind of where it all started for him, really. He just found this voice for all this stuff. And, only 2 years later, Rob Gilson and G.B. Smith had already been killed in action.
Yeah.
And Tolkien was recovering from trench fever at Southern General Hospital in Edgbaston, Birmingham.
Mm-hmm.
On December 9th, 1916, Tolkien left the hospital on sick leave, and he spent the holidays at Great Haywood with Edith.
And it was right around that time, either while he was in hospital or while he was in Great Haywood, that Tolkien started writing the Book of Lost Tales and the original version of The Fall of Gondolin, Tuor and the Exiles of Gondolin. Hammond and Scull state, and again this is in the chronology, it is perhaps during his time of convalescence at Great Haywood that Tolkien draws heraldic devices for 3 places in England of great significance to himself and Edith: the village of Great Haywood and the towns of Warwick and Cheltenham, to which he gives names in Goldegrin, that's his gnomish language, which would eventually become Sindarin, Tavrobel, Cortirion, and Kelbaros.
Yeah, and if you've read the Book of Lost Tales, you know how important some of those places are to the early mythology.
That's right.
It's so cool that they were actually all closely connected with places that were important in the history of his life with Edith.
Absolutely. And somehow, 20 years later, he had found his way to a story about an unlikely hero named Bilbo Baggins, because during this week in 1936, Tolkien was corresponding with Susan Dagnall from Allen and Unwin, and they were hammering out the details for the publication of The Hobbit. Of course, the rest, as they say, is history.
That's so cool. I love that. You can see how that inspiration that started there at the Council of London just led to this entire life he spent sub-creating this mythology that we know and love today, and that's what we're here to discuss.
Absolutely.
Really, really cool, and a great week for Tolkien history.
Mm-hmm.
But on that note, why don't we go ahead and get back into Three's Company and pick up where we left off with Janet, Chrissy, and... Wait, sorry, I do that all the time. I mean Frodo, Sam, and Pippin.
No Mr. Roper?
No.
All right, then I'm going to go ahead and start out right after where we left off last week.
Okay.
The singing drew nearer. One clear voice rose now above the others. It was singing in the fair elven tongue, of which Frodo knew only a little, and the others knew nothing. Yet the sound, blending with the melody, seemed to shape itself in their thought into words which they only partly understood. This was the song as Frodo heard it, and I'm going to go ahead and just read the first and last stanzas. Snow white, O lady clear, O queen beyond the western seas, O light to us that wander here, mid the world of woven trees. O Elbereth, Gilthoniel, we still remember, we who dwell in this far land beneath the trees, thy starlight on the western seas.
One of the most iconic songs.
It really
Lord of
is.
Rings.
O Elbereth, Gilthoniel, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to park here for a bit, folks. We may spend half the episode on this poem.
We've got a few things to talk about
We
here.
do. We got a few things to say. So go ahead and get comfortable. We're going to be here for a bit.
Yeah.
The first thing is this notion that the sound and the melody seem to shape itself in their thought into words that they only partly understood.
Yeah.
We talked about this concept of Osanwe, didn't we? Is this sort of like a rudimentary Osanwe?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it is. And for listeners who have heard us talk about this concept in the last few episodes, or maybe for those who don't remember, Osanwe is basically, it's a Quenya word meaning interchange of thought. And it's basically telepathy. And it's telepathy.
As opposed to the interchange of the 405 and the 5? I don't know. It's the only interchange I know.
It's a lot easier for a mere mortal to survive.
To navigate, that's true.
Yeah, to navigate and to use, it is a sort of a natural telepathy that elves have, Maiar, Valar, and even men could have it if we weren't so bound up in our bodies. And there's a lot Tolkien has written on this in an essay called Osanwe Kento, which is kind of hard to find. You have to go to one of the linguistic journals to do so.
Parma El Delamberon or
this one is in Vinyar Tengwar, which is actually a little easier to find. At least all the old issues are available. But you have to order like these bound volumes of them. But I mean, really, I think for our purposes, the closest parallel I think we need to kind of keep in mind is in the Silmarillion, chapter 17. Remember when Finrod found the people of Beor in Osiriand?
Mm-hmm.
And remember that the text said, "Now men awoke and listened to Felagund as he harped and sang. The things of which he sang, of the making of Arda and the bliss of Aman beyond the shadows of the sea, came as clear visions before their eyes, and his elvish speech was interpreted in each mind according to its measure." That's
right. I remember that. Yeah.
And it didn't really end there. Actually, Osanwe was very much at work in that first meeting between Finrod and men, because Finrod actually, the text says, could read in the minds of men such thoughts as they wished to reveal in speech.
Like a babblefish.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, it is pretty much like that. He could basically understand their thoughts because he was more powerful in Osanwe than they were, and so he was able to read their thoughts. And so
it's the universal translator. Whatever universe you're in, whatever secondary world you're in, there's a way for beings to understand each other.
To understand one another. Yeah. Exactly. It facilitates.
But this makes more sense than a universal translator or a babblefish.
Because it relies on the essential affinity between all beings on Arda. Yeah. Exactly. Part of our nature, as opposed to a technological process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
In the essay Quendi and Eldar, which is in the War of the Jewels, and was actually very closely related to the Osanwe essay. I think they were actually found in the same box, of Tolkien's papers. In that essay, Finrod's ability to understand men in that scene is actually given as an example of direct transmission and reception of thought.
Yeah.
Which means it's safe to say it goes both ways. Finrod was able to send and receive. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. I mean, the language that's used here is really very similar. It's almost the same kind of language.
Yeah, you're right. It really is. Thought into words, which they only partly understood. Mm-hmm. Just like with the men, it was interpreted in each mind according to its measure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's super cool stuff. It's a
really
deep cut, certainly.
There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But boy, it's meaty and it's relevant to so much, to so many individual moments that would otherwise really not have a lot of light shed on them. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially when we think about elves as sort of natural linguists, and we'll see the role that language plays later in this episode.
Yes. That's
going to be really
point.
neat. Yeah.
I agree. So they're singing to Elbereth, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Elbereth, better known as Varda, for those who have read the Silmarillion. And last week, Alan, you read a passage from The Road Goes Ever On about these elves and had pointed out, which I thought was fascinating, that they were returning from a visit to the Palantir of the Tower Hills.
That's correct, yeah.
And you had started to get into the names of Varda before you kind of caught yourself.
Well, yeah, I was like, I'm stepping on Sean's toes there.
So, yeah, well, we share.
But tonight, it's a word nerdery thing.
Yeah, it is. But you know what? Hey, you've learned much in your time at the Prancing Pony Podcast. You've become quite the word nerd.
I try.
But no, tonight it's time to go back to The Road Goes Ever On and tell you a little bit more about Varda. But before we do, I want to remind you that book, The Road Goes Ever On, was first released in 1967. That was actually 10 years before anybody could read the Silmarillion.
That's right.
Now, with that said, Tolkien reminds us in that book that Elbereth was the usual name in Sindarin of the Vala called in Quenya Varda, which means the exalted. It is more or less the equivalent, he says, of Quenya Elentari, Star Queen. But Bereth actually meant spouse, and was used of one who is queen as spouse of a king. Then he goes on to tell us about one of the titles that she has, which is Fanuilas. In the song in this chapter, Fanuilas is rendered Snow White, and that's one of the things you were starting to go into last time.
Yeah.
But Tolkien says that translation, he says, this is very inadequate. Fana is an elvish element with the primary meaning veil. The Sindarin form fan was usually applied to clouds, floating as veils over the blue sky, or the sun or moon, or resting on hills. In a footnote, he gives the example of Fanuithal, the mountain of Cloudyhead, which is one of the three peaks over Moria that we'll see in,
That's right.
Maybe about a year, a little over a year.
Yeah, I guess you're probably right. It will take a while, probably about a year. You're right. But Tolkien has more for us. Oh, actually, no, you're right. It's going to be more than a year because the Council of Elrond alone will take us like 5 weeks.
It's going to take us over a month, yeah.
Now, Tolkien does have more for us here in this in The Road Goes Ever On. He says, in Quenya, however, the simple word fana acquired a special sense. Owing to the close association of the High Elves with the Valar, it was applied to the veils or raiment in which the Valar presented themselves to physical eyes. These were the bodies in which they were self-incarnated. They usually took the shape of the bodies of elves and men. The Valar assumed these forms when they came and dwelt in Arda. They did so because of their love and desire for the children of God, and he puts in parentheses Erusen, or maybe it's Erusen. I'm not sure exactly where the stress is. He usually uses the word Eruhini to mean the children of Eru, for whom they were to prepare Arda. The future forms of elves and men had been revealed to them, though they had no part in their design or making, and the precise time of their appearance was not known. I love this, that 10 years before the Silmarillion was out, if you got this one book that was probably a little kind of fringe in that sense, it wasn't, the mainstream book, you really got
cool
some
sneak
deep
preview
insight.
Yes, I know. Of stuff that we take for granted because we've read the Silmarillion.
I know, this is so amazing, and it's not even done yet.
Yeah.
In these fanar, in these veils, they later presented themselves to the elves and appeared as persons of majestic but not gigantic stature, vested in robes expressing their individual natures and functions. The High Elves said that these forms were always in some degree radiant, as if suffused with a light from within. In Quenya, Fana thus came to signify the radiant and majestic figure of one of the great Valar. In Sindarin, especially as used by the High Elves, and here I'm going to insert my own parenthetical, remember that their original tongue was Quenya, but Thingol forbade its use in his realms in Beleriand, which kind of turned Quenya into this Elvish Latin.
With Sindarin being the language of everyday speech.
Exactly, and Latin being this language of lore that was only spoken by a few. So in Sindarin then, the originally identical word fan, or cloud, was also given the same sense. Fanuilos, thus in full, signified bright angelic figure ever white as snow.
That is amazing.
And that's what the real translation would be.
Snow White is really not adequate, is it?
No, it's not, especially for anybody who's ever seen a Disney movie.
That is fantastic. And I think from now on, when we say raiment, or when we refer to raiment.
Don't we have a better image of that now?
Yeah, we do. And I think we need to start using this word.
Fana? Yeah, I love it.
When we talk about, Fea and Hroa, why not Fana?
Why not Fana and Fanar? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a very good point. And I love the concept. Vested in robes expressing their individual natures and functions, always in some degree radiant. Oh, just majestic.
Expressing
Beautiful
their
stuff.
individual natures and functions. So you can imagine that, Varda's would be very starry, very celestial. Olmo's might,
sparkly, a lot of glitter.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Olmo's might, I don't know, have sort of a watery
Scaly,
effect, a little
or a
ripply
scaly
or
effect, like
scaly, or
fish,
maybe it looks, kind of fish-like. Wow, it's really cool to think
Isn't
about
it
that.
amazing? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yavanna's, of course, would be, like made of
all
leaves
green and lush and
all lush,
vines, and it's beautiful.
Tulkas, though, is wearing a T-shirt with 3 wolves on it.
With sleeves cut off, man.
That's right. And he's wearing those Levi's that are like just shredded at the mid thigh.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that.
I don't know where that came from, but man, that was good.
It was good.
Oh yeah, you can thank me for that later, folks. That was
great.
Fun.
This is off topic, but
he's got a mullet, right? I mean, he's got a mullet.
Oh, he's totally got a mullet. Yeah.
Oh, goodness. I'm so sorry. Let's get back on
that's
track.
Great. I love it. No, this is also off topic, but I realize Uelos, Fan Uelos, that second part of that Uelos.
Yeah.
Amon Uelos was another name for, it was a Sindarin form of Oyalose.
Oyalose. Right.
Which is another name for which mountain that Varda lives on?
Taniquetil.
Very good.
I had to pause for a good moment. I'm not sure how long I'll let that pause live in the recording. I might make that pause 5 seconds longer or maybe just 2 milliseconds. So it's immediate.
There you go.
No, I'm kidding.
Good stuff.
Anyway. Yeah. You're right, though. That it is a reminder of Oyalose. I had completely forgotten that connection, but you're absolutely right. That's certainly the whiteness there, Mount Everwhite. So she is the queen. She is Manwë's wife.
Queen of the Valar, Manwë's wife.
Yeah.
She is the queen of the stars. She is light. She has the light of Eru in her face, right?
Yes, that's right. That is right. I'd forgotten about that, that she has that radiance more than any of the others. Which is interesting because, of course, Melkor was very interested in her. And again, I think it's his hunger for and hatred of the light. That's something that we would also then see in Ungoliant, but that's a whole other story.
Well, I think it was Verlin Flieger who observed that Varda is light and Melkor is heat. And, maybe there was a chance that those two could have come together. And, who knows what would have happened if that had happened. But,
oh, goodness.
But as it stands, they did not get along.
No,
she rejected him. And,
Utterly,
and so she's this just pure radiance without the burning heat. And he is just heat without light.
Wow. Man, that's Verlin Flieger for you right there.
She's just got some great stuff. I can't remember which book that was in. It was probably in Splintered Light, but
that sounds like it was because I remember reading that, and that's the most recent work of hers that I've read. So
yeah, super cool stuff. But
it really is.
Yeah, Queen of the Stars, Queen of the Valar. She was the one who, Manwë, remember, was Lord of the Airs, and when those two were together, Manwë could see farther than.
That's right.
He could see really far. I can't remember exactly
very far. I know. He could see really far, man. I'm sure that's how Tolkien put it. He could just see really, really.
He's just like
righteously
so
far.
Like totally far.
Like totally far, man. All right. Now that's going to go down a really bad road.
That is.
In the third stanza, there's a phrase, "O stars that in the sunless year." I love that reference. It's this callback to that time when years were measured in a very different way before the sun and moon. Back when the stars were created and the elves were first born.
Yeah.
So these Noldor exiles are remembering a time when her starlight was on the western seas. How old does that make them?
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're going to see some stuff in here that's going to suggest that they are extremely old, going back to, the earliest.
Very early first age, yeah.
Yeah, the very early first age. And as you said, obviously before the sun and moon. Yeah, this line about the world of woven trees is interesting too. In the Sindarin version of this hymn to Elbereth that we're going to hear in the mini meetings chapter,
right?
And I actually looked ahead. That's actually on page 231 of our edition.
Okay.
And we will get to that sometime next season, early next season.
Sometime, yeah, early, yeah.
There's a phrase in Sindarin in that, which is O Gala Thremen Enrath.
Yes.
And this is translated as tree-tangled middle lands in the road goes ever on.
Uh-huh.
And that's rather similar to here amid the world of woven trees, right? I mean, it's not entirely literal, but I think that makes sense, right? Because this is just the representation of the Elvish words in a hobbit's mind, right? It's
you're right.
It's a mental translation. It's not.
This is the song as Frodo heard it. Mm-hmm. I wonder what the song was as Sam heard it. But even simpler than this.
It probably was simpler, yeah.
Yeah.
And as Pippin heard it, it probably had a lot more references to food
and beer. Yeah. No doubt. Tree tangled middle lands. I mean, that's very clearly Middle Earth. Mm-hmm. And this tree tangled, that's an interesting
middle lands.
Phrase, isn't it?
Ennorath, actually, Ennor does mean Middle Earth.
Endor, right. Mm-hmm. Middle lands, but tree tangled is interesting. I wonder what to make of that. But we also get, here beneath the woven trees in this version, but in the last stanza, in this far land beneath the trees. So maybe the same kind of concept there.
Maybe so, yeah.
But that is when Frodo realizes these aren't the elves from the Tower Hills. Mm-hmm. These are Noldor. Mm-hmm. They're high elves.
That fairest folk. Few of that fairest folk are ever seen. And folks who haven't read the Silmarillion might be wondering, well, which fairest folk are these?
Yeah.
And I guess maybe we should have reviewed this last week when they first, sort of arrived on the scene or almost arrived on the scene. But I guess we probably have time today for a little overview of what happened in the Silmarillion.
Little Reader's Digest version of it.
Yeah, for those who didn't read the Silmarillion, didn't listen to our first season. Basically, when the elves awoke in the sunless times, before the sun and moon existed, it was only the stars in the sky at the time. When they awoke, they were invited by the Valar in the uttermost west to come to Aman, or Valinor.
Right.
In response to that summons, they split into two groups. The Eldar, which means the people of the stars, they actually answered the summons, whereas the Avari, the unwilling, did not. Now, we don't really hear much about the Avari after that point.
No.
The Eldar are pretty much the only elves that we spend any time with, know anything about.
True.
But we know the Eldar then further subdivide into three kindreds, the Vanyar, the Noldor, and the Teleri. And then they all start making this big migration west towards the ocean, towards the Great Sea, so that they can make their way over to Valinor. Well, the Teleri actually split again a few times while they're on the road to Valinor.
I was going to say a few times, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, basically, the way it works is just, as they're going, just at various points, just different groups splinter off and just say, we'll just stay here. We'll just stay here.
We like this place. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And so quite a few of them never made it, and they become groups like the Sindar, or the Grey Elves, and the Nandor, or the Sylvan Elves.
Yeah.
And most of the elves that we see in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings are from one of those two groups, right? They're either Sindar or they're Nandor. But the ones who ended up making it all the way to Aman or Valinor in the west, those are the ones that became the High Elves, and that's all of the Vanyar, all of the Noldor, and then some of the Teleri.
Right.
Also, footnote to that, if you remember The Hobbit, chapter 8, when he talks about the Light Elves and the Deep Elves and the Sea Elves that went to Faerie in the west, same thing. The Light Elves are the Vanyar, the Deep Elves are the Noldor, and the Sea Elves are the Teleri.
That's correct, yeah.
And I hope that our listeners who do know The Hobbit and do know the Silmarillion will forgive that little
it was a very short
recap.
Yeah, it's a summary. It by no means is meant to be exhaustive.
No,
in any way, shape, or form.
We're totally oversimplifying here, and I think we're probably saying stuff that some people already know. But for folks who don't, that's kind of what we're talking about when we talk about High Elves.
Yeah, if The Lord of the Rings is the only one you've read, we want to make sure you understand this.
Exactly. Yeah, we want you to get those little nuggets.
Mm-hmm.
So the Vanyar, the Noldor, some of the Teleri made it across the sea to the west, and the only ones that ever came back to Middle-earth were the Noldor, and they came back as exiles following Feanor. But to get that whole story, you really do need to read the Silmarillion.
That's true. So that makes these elves ancient indeed, but we have to remember that elves are immortal, or, well, that's probably the wrong word. We want to use Tolkien's terms. To be precise, they have serial longevity. In letter number 131... I need to come up with a stinger for that.
Yeah, we need to come up with some theme.
And it's probably not going to be you going to do. I just say.
Why not? Come on, that was good.
That was, but we'll have to pick better music than that. So this is the letter that Tolkien wrote to Milton Waldman that we quote literally almost every episode, because really there's that much in there. What's funny is we might have quoted 50 different elements from that letter because it's that big of a letter.
Yeah.
There's just so much there. But in that, he talked about the difference between elves and men in a way that I think will be helpful here for those who didn't maybe listen to the Silmarillion episodes with us or haven't read the Silmarillion either. And here's what he said. The doom of the elves is to be immortal, to love the beauty of the world, to bring it to full flower with their gifts of delicacy and perfection, to last while it lasts, never leaving it even when slain, but returning. And yet when the followers come, and those are the men, to teach them and make way for them, to fade as the followers grow and absorb the life from which both proceed. The doom or the gift of men is mortality, freedom from the circles of the world. Since the point of view of the whole cycle is the elvish, mortality is not explained mythically. It is a mystery of God of which no more is known than that what God has purposed for men is hidden, a grief and an envy to the immortal elves. Now, fact is, you'd know all this if you listened to season 1, so you know what to do, right?
Yes, you do.
They're still there. They're still available.
And go pick yourself up a copy of the Silmarillion if you haven't read it yet.
Oh, absolutely. You got to do that if you're going to go through season 1.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool stuff. And it's just, again, one of those places where knowing the history, knowing the Silmarillion just adds so much richness to this moment. You know,
it really does.
Just a couple of short paragraphs, a poem, a single poem and a couple of short paragraphs. But if you know everything that was in Tolkien's mind, wow, so much you can get out of it.
And speaking of short, but so much you can get out of it, I've got probably the shortest passage I've ever had you read is next.
All right, I'll jump right in.
And jump right out, for that matter. It's that short.
Before long, the elves came down the lane towards the valley. They passed slowly, and the hobbits could see the starlight glimmering on their hair and in their eyes. They bore no lights, yet as they walked a shimmer, like the light of the moon above the rim of the hills before it rises, seemed to fall about their feet.
Now you know why a short passage is all we needed. There's a little bit there, isn't there? There's something to talk about.
There is a little bit there. This light, they don't carry any lights.
Right.
But they just radiate this light.
Yeah, I mean, it's subtle. It's a shimmer.
It is so.
I mean, that description, the light of the moon above the rim of the hills before it rises.
It's like that ghostly, faint radiance that you see. It's not, you can't read by it.
No, but you sure know that's where the moon's going to be.
That's right.
You can see that that's where it's coming. Yeah. Yeah. That shimmer fell about their feet. That is a beautiful thing.
And since we know that these are Noldor who came back from Valinor in the First Age, we know why they have this light surrounding them and in their eyes. Because if you remember the Silmarillion, you know about these two classifications, I guess you can say, of elves.
Different than the kindreds. This is not the same breakdown.
Different than the kindreds. This is more of a term of experience.
Yes.
It's a term to describe them. Calaquendi and Moraquendi, or light elves and dark elves.
Right.
And the Calaquendi are those elves that actually lived in Valinor during the time of the two trees. Yeah. And then actually saw the light of the two trees with their own eyes.
Yep. All the Vanyar, all the Noldor, and most of the Teleri would be Calaquendi. But that's why so few of them are back to Middle Earth. And back to Middle Earth, it's only the Noldor.
Right.
Are the Calaquendi.
Right. And we see this throughout the Silmarillion. We see the difference between the Calaquendi and the Moraquendi. We see things like when the Noldor first arrived back in Middle Earth, the light of Aman was not dimmed in their eyes. They had this power, this strength and this energy. I don't even know what else to call it.
You're right.
It's just an energy.
There was a bearing. There was something in their in just who they were because of their exposure and presence in the light. That made them distinctly different from the Moraquendi. It
was a literal enlightenment, and that's kind of what set up basically all the events of the First Age, all the events of the Silmarillion. And again, we can't possibly summarize it all here, but go back and listen to that season or read that book.
We had a hard time summarizing it in 50 episodes, but
you're not kidding about that. Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and pick up a fairly short passage here as well. We're going to just kind of the initial conversation here with Frodo and the elves. So the last sentence of the paragraph that you were reading talks about how, as the last elf passed, he turned and looked towards the hobbits and laughed.
Right.
"Hail, Frodo," he cried. "You are abroad late, or are you perhaps lost?" Then he called aloud to the others, and all the company stopped and gathered round. "This is indeed wonderful," they said. "3 hobbits in a wood at night. We have not seen such a thing since Bilbo went away. What is the meaning of it?" "The meaning of it, fair people," said Frodo, "is simply that we seem to be going the same way as you are. I like walking under the stars, but I would welcome your company." "We have no need of other company, and hobbits are so dull," they laughed. Oh my goodness.
That's fantastic.
It really is. There's a couple little things here I wanted to make sure we caught. First off, there's this the fact that they knew that Bilbo went away. They'd witnessed Bilbo's going away, so they were well aware of that.
They knew Bilbo in the first place, which is
that's
right,
right, and they knew Frodo in the first place. "Hail, Frodo! You're out late, and we haven't seen anything since Bilbo left." So clearly, they know Bilbo, they know Frodo, they know a lot.
Yeah.
There's also this little reminder of elven condescension, isn't there?
Yeah, hobbits are so dull.
I mean, I know they may be joking, but they're not, right?
They're like joking, not joking. It's kind of like passive aggressive.
I mean, maybe they're just poking fun, but I think
they are.
Let's be honest. This is the same group of people that called the dwarves the stunted people, that named men the sickly.
Yeah, there is that. There is that.
There's a little superiority complex, especially with the Noldor.
But we last saw these guys in The Hobbit in chapter 3 in Rivendell.
Yep, you're right.
Yeah, and they're just so full of mirth and
they were keeping Bilbo awake. They were trying to sleep, and they were
making noise so he couldn't sleep. They're making fun of the dwarves. "Don't dip your beard in the foam, Father. It's long enough already."
Yeah,
just
that's true.
Silly stuff, and I kind of love that
silly.
because these are Noldor who were around in the First Age, and if you have read the Silmarillion, they've seen some stuff, man. I mean, they have tragedy and death and
I was about to say they've seen fire and they've seen rain, but
they've seen sunny days that I thought would never end.
That I thought would never end. That's right.
They've seen lonely times when they could not find a friend.
That's right. And that may be our only James Taylor reference on the show, huh?
It probably will be, until I go back and listen to some more James Taylor songs and think of another one that I know the words to. But no, I mean, they've just seen so much pain and suffering.
Yeah, they really have.
And yet they're able to joke and they're able to, to poke fun at the hobbits and
like we talked about with Tra-la-la-lally. I mean, again, same kind of thing. These are high elves, and yet they're being silly. Why?
Yeah.
Because they understand perspective. They can put this all into context, and
exactly
they're able to find those moments. So
I think so. And I think it was Corey Olson who first kind of gave me that perspective on the Tra-la-la-lally elves. And it's great. It's really brilliant stuff. And it's just inspiring to me. I think it's so cool to see this become of the Noldor after everything that they experienced.
I absolutely agree. But we're going to go ahead and dive further into this conversation. I'm going to have you pick up the next reading.
Okay, here we go. "Who are you, and who is your lord?" asked Frodo.
"We don't have a lord."
"What?"
"I told you, we're an anarcho-syndicalist commune. We're taking it turns to act as a sort of executive officer for the week." I'm sorry. I can't even keep a straight face, but when I heard "who is your lord," I had to go there.
Well done. Well placed.
With a simple majority in the case of pretty internal affairs.
But with a 2/3 majority in the case of...
Shut up! Shut up! Oh, goodness. I'm so sorry.
Man.
I apologize. I'll let you read that line without interruption. How's that?
I appreciate that, but that was well done. I don't regret it. I regret nothing.
Goodness. That's right.
"Who are you, and who is your lord?" asked Frodo. "I am Gildor," answered their leader, the elf who had first hailed him. "Gildor Inglorion of the house of Finrod. We are exiles, and most of our kindred have long ago departed, and we too are now only tarrying here a while, ere we return over the great sea. But some of our kinsfolk dwell still in peace in Rivendell. Come now, Frodo, tell us what you are doing, for we see that there is some shadow of fear upon you." "Oh, wise people," interrupted Pippin eagerly, "tell us about the Black Riders." "Black Riders," they said in low voices. Why do you ask about black riders? Because 2 black riders have overtaken us today, or one has done so twice, said Pippin. Only a little while ago he slipped away as you drew near. The elves did not answer at once, but spoke together softly in their own tongue. At length Gildor turned to the hobbits. We will not speak of this here, he said. We think you had best come now with us.
I have to say I really exercised some self-control there, some self-restraint when you talked about why do you ask about black riders. I wanted to say something about, Gildor, have you been wearing your Black Rider costume again? Oh goodness, sort of like, have you been lighting the grail-shaped beacon?
You're lighting the grail-shaped beacon again, yeah.
Yeah. But then there's also the Gildor thing. I'm just like going off on all these tangents when you're like, I am Gildor. It didn't matter how many times I read this, and I read this a lot in preparation for our discussion tonight. Until I heard you reading it, I didn't even think about the similarity between Gildor and Gilder, and I just kept thinking, you know how much I love watching you work, but I've got my country's 500th anniversary to plan, my wedding to arrange, my wife to murder, and Gilder to frame for it. I'm
booked. I'm swamped. That's it. I'm swamped.
Get some rest. If you haven't got your health, you haven't got anything. I just couldn't. I had to go there, but
wow.
That's Gilder, not Gildor.
You managed to get 2 Monty Python references and a Princess Bride reference into that
James
one
Taylor
reading.
reference in 5 minutes.
And a James Taylor reference. Yeah. That's got to be some sort of nerd record. I
probably need to stay on my notes now, don't I?
Maybe, but that's all right.
That was fun.
It's fun.
Yeah, there is a lot here, and that's why I didn't interrupt you. And that's why I saved
now
all the
I cannot
stuff.
get Humperdinck out of my head. Thank you. If you haven't got your
Humperdinck.
What have you got? Humperdinck.
I'm not listening. Anyway.
Oh, man.
Oh, goodness.
So, Gildor. This guy, Gildor, not Gilder.
Yeah, Gildor. I want to make real clear, this isn't Gilder, this is Gildor. He's the House of Finrod. Now, I want to point something out here because Hammond and Scull remind us that when The Lord of the Rings was first published, Finrod was the name of Finway's 3rd son. Okay, so and those of you who read the Silmarillion understand, wait a minute, that's not quite right. Finway's 3rd son in the Silmarillion is Finarfin.
Right.
Well, anyway, in this earlier version, or in back when Lord of the Rings was first published, Finrod was in Finarfin's place, and he had a son named Inglor Felagund.
Right. So the elf that we now know as Finrod was originally called Inglor.
So he turned that Finrod into Finarfin, and he turned Inglor Felagund into Finrod Felagund. So in the earliest editions, Galadriel is described in the appendices as the sister of Felagund, just Felagund, but in later editions as sister of Finrod Felagund. Now, there is no mention of Gildor in the Silmarillion, and Finrod Felagund never married. So that's why we're left to speculate about Gildor's actual connection with the House of Finrod. He can't be a child of Finrod.
Right. And it is enticing because, I mean, that ION suffix does usually mean son of. So
Right.
Gildor Inglorion should mean Gildor,
it almost
son
makes
of
you think he's the son of Inglor.
Yeah.
So you almost think that when this was written initially, Tolkien imagined him as the son of Inglor, the grandson of Finway. That's pretty impressive. Or great-grandson, you're right.
Great-grandson of Finway. Grandson of Finrod, who we would call Finarfin. Son of Inglor, who we would call Finrod.
Right. So in this case, he would be the son of the character who would later go on to become Finrod.
Right. Maybe. And we don't know. It's possible that he was just recycling some names. We've seen him do that.
He's done that before. And of the house of, it just could mean that he's loyal to that house, that he's not related to him at all, but that he is, his people are, part of the house of Finrod.
And I think that's what we have to conclude based on the texts we have, because
Finrod
again, in the Silmarillion, Finrod, he wasn't married. He left his girlfriend back in Valinor when he came over. Amaria, I believe her name was.
I believe you're right.
Yeah, he never had any children. So,
and he even when Galadriel told him, "Hey, it's time to settle down," he said, actually, all of a sudden, I have this feeling that I'm going to be involved in a prophecy, and I'm not going to be able to do that.
Right.
And he was right. Yeah.
He was absolutely right. Yeah. Oh, I love the Silmarillion.
I know. It makes everything so
great.
rich. So rich. And then there's Pippin. Oh, tell us about the Black Riders. Tell us, please.
Dude, come on. Like, if only Gandalf were there to just say, fool of a took.
Fool. Give him a little smack with the stick. There,
yeah.
You know? I mean, it's an understandable question, but he's a little overeager.
A little.
He probably should have left this to Frodo, who clearly, I mean, these people know Frodo and Frodo knows them. So really, Pippin should let Frodo do the talking, but he's Pippin, so he doesn't.
Well, yeah, I mean, they know Frodo. I don't know how much Frodo knows them, right? But
that's true. I mean, Frodo's probably seen them, but
still, Frodo speaks the language a little bit. He's clearly the leader. He's the leader of the group.
Yeah.
Pippin really should have left this to Frodo.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But the elves, kind of huddle together, mutter, talk amongst yourselves,
Harumph. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we don't usually do this, but come with us.
Yeah.
And, that's a good thing. We're going to get a nice little elvish party here. And I'm going to read probably the shortest passage I've ever read. This is just
You've got a good line here that
it is, it is a good one in Quenya. So here we go. Oh, fair folk, this is good fortune beyond my hope, said Pippin. Sam was speechless. I thank you indeed, Gildor Inglorion, said Frodo, bowing. Ellen sila lumen omentielvo. A star shines on the hour of our meeting, he added in the high elven speech. Be careful, friends, cried Gildor, laughing. Speak no secrets. Here is a scholar in the ancient tongue. Bilbo was a good master. Hail, elf friend, he said, bowing to Frodo. And I sure hope I got that right. Ellen sila lumen omentielvo.
Yeah, I think you nailed it.
I think I did.
Yeah. Did I say there's a good line in there? There's like tons of good lines in there.
There's a ton, I know.
I love
it's
that.
It's rich. I wanted to start with the fact that we get a breakdown of how each of the hobbits responded.
Oh, yeah.
Pippin just says, this is good fortune beyond my hope. Sam was totally speechless, as we would expect, slack-jawed, just kind of...
he's starstruck. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I thank you indeed, Gildor Inglorion, says Frodo. So he's much more formal and flowery.
He knows what to do. He's more at home in this situation. I mean, even though he doesn't know these elves personally, but he knows what to do in this situation. He knows how to talk.
He does. Yeah.
He knows how to bow. He knows the proper greeting. He knows how to say it. He apparently pronounces it well,
Yeah. Really, I mean, that's impressive stuff. And just seeing the different reactions of each of the hobbits is very telling. Speaks a little bit to each of their characters, of course. And then, of course, Gildor's response is to laugh.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sure there were some, maybe not mispronunciations, but I'm sure it wasn't said as fluently as somebody who's natively able to speak that language.
He probably
was
spoke
good
it
enough.
with an accent. Yeah.
Yeah. A hobbit accent. A little rustic.
Yeah, exactly. I can see how the elves would think it's funny, because it's just got to be a little bit ridiculous. And I don't mean that in a bad way.
No.
I mean that in sort of the most positive way it's possible.
A hobbit speaking.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's just kind of incongruous. And they're kind of like, whoa, never expected to see this.
Yeah, you're right.
And I think it was, I was rereading The Hobbit. Well, I was reading for the first time The Hobbit to my daughter. And just a few weeks ago, we got to the part where Bilbo is in the camp. He's bringing the Arkenstone to Bard and the Elven King.
Boy, what a moment that is!
And there actually is a little description of sort of like how ridiculous he looked in his mail.
Yes,
he's soaking wet and he's sneezing, and there is something in there about it was kind of a ridiculous sight to the elves there, and I kind of get that feel from this. This probably is a little bit ridiculous, but also nice to see a hobbit actually just make the effort.
Sure, absolutely. And then, of course, there's that last line.
Mm-hmm.
Hail, elf friend. We have a lot to say about that, don't we?
We do. I mean, it just looks like a little throwaway, name. Doesn't really look like much here, but
no.
Verlin
just
Flieger
a polite nothing, really.
Yeah, right, exactly. But again, if you know more about the Legendarium, this name takes on a lot of significance.
It does.
Verlin Flieger had a really wonderful observation about this that Hammond and Scull reprinted in their Reader's Companion. It's actually from an article that I don't have, but Hammond and Scull included in the book. And Have we mentioned, by the way, that folks should buy that?
Yeah,
because it's an amazing book.
The Reader's Companion is so helpful. Yeah.
Hammond and Scull's Reader's Companion is great. We have links to it in our official library. We use it quite a bit, obviously. And again, even if you're not, doing a podcast or writing a paper, it's just a great correspondence to have, right next to you when you're reading. It's fantastic.
Really is.
But anyway, I digress. Flieger has a really cool observation about this, saying that at first reading, it seems of little significance. Responding to Frodo's elvish greeting, the elf Gildor replies, "Hail, elf friend." At this point in the story, it seems to be simply polite elf-hobbit talk. Even when in a later, more serious moment, Gildor says to Frodo, "I name you elf friend," this still seems largely a formal rather than a substantive locution.
That's true, but with every repetition, the meaning deepens. And later on, when they're in the house of Tom Bombadil, we'll see Goldberry tell Frodo, "I see you are an elf friend. The light in your eyes and the ring in your voice tells it." Well, at that point, we begin to realize there's more than just politeness here. Yeah. Elf friend is some kind of special identity. It's confirmed when, even later in the story, Legolas introduces Aragorn to Haldir of Lorien as an elf friend of the folk of Westernesse.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Flieger goes on to point out that, quote, "It is only at the Council of Elrond that we discover that the phrase has a history beyond the immediate present."
Right.
Formally accepting his offer to carry the ring to Mount Doom, Elrond tells Frodo, "Though all the mighty elf friends of old, Hador and Hurin and Turin and Beren himself, were assembled together, your seat should be among them." That gives me chills just reading that.
Yeah.
She points out what seemed at first a polite form of address, later a complimentary epithet, can here be seen as the sign of election to a special company.
That is exactly right. I'm spot on.
Yeah.
We talked in episodes 85 and 87 near the end of The Hobbit about how Bilbo,
that's right,
being called an elf friend, was a sign of a significant change in him and really became a part of his identity. We probably need to remind folks that in early versions of the mythology, Tolkien actually had a character named Alfwine, which is Old English for elf friend. And he was a human traveler to Faerie. He basically was kind of a cross between a bunch of later characters we'd see, like Elendil and Eärendil and more. He was
kind of a
traveler who met the elves and brought all these stories back.
That's right.
And he was key to the mythology early on. I mean, this elf friend concept is a big deal. It's full of meaning. Big deal,
yeah.
Going back to Verlyn Flieger, she also has some really cool stuff on this name in her book, A Question of Time. She says, "The epithet elf friend became one of the most recurrent elements in the mythology, the emblem and embodiment of some of Tolkien's most deeply rooted attitudes toward myth, language, and history."
Good stuff. And, I'd even add that in a Prancing Pony Pondering back in 2016, when we were still writing Prancing Pony Ponderings, when we weren't a weekly show, you wrote a really interesting piece. And I believe you said this moment is Frodo's initiation into the circle of elf friends on his own merits, not simply as a relative of Bilbo. And it begins with his speaking the word Elen.
I may have written that.
Lumen Omen
Yeah.
And in other words, it begins with an act of spoken language.
Yeah, that's right. And so we see that, language is sort of like a mark of culture. Again, we've talked about that before.
Absolutely.
I do remember writing that. That was...
Yeah, we wrote some decent stuff back then. I wish we still had time, but that move to weekly has absolutely killed the idea of ponderings.
It really has. I mean, I'm glad we're doing the weekly episodes, but it's
I am too.
There's no time to sit down and do a little research project once a month.
Yeah, there just isn't anymore.
But they're still out there on the website for folks who haven't read them. You should go check them out.
Yeah, if you haven't read them, please do. We actually, minimal digressions, very few pop culture references. I mean, this is like, semi-serious stuff.
Yeah. Cool stuff. Well, good. Let's see. I think that's pretty much it for that passage, isn't it?
I think so. I mean, that was pretty much about it.
Quite
we just
a bit.
Spent about 15 minutes on 8 lines.
Right.
Yeah, pretty impressive stuff.
This is a misleading chapter. It's a short chapter. Doesn't seem like there's too much there until you start diving into it and you realize.
Right. I had originally scheduled 2 episodes for this chapter, and I thought that might be too much, that we'd have to stretch material. And it turns out that we're having to kind of speed up to make sure we get it done in 3.
Yeah, I know. I remember
There's
us
just so much more
talking
here.
about that and thinking like, maybe we should do this in 3. Maybe we can get 3 out of this. And
Yeah, maybe.
yeah,
As long as you keep them
pretty
under
cool.
2 hours, right?
Right. Pretty cool.
Good stuff. So the elves bring them along, and they explain a little bit about where they're going. They're going to go to the hills above Woodhall. And then there's a line that we don't have marked as reading, but I want to at least discuss it a little bit. He says that elves, even more than hobbits, and boy, that's big, could walk when they wished without sound or footfall. Well, that's interesting. We already know that hobbits can walk so silently that even wildlife creatures don't know they're there.
Right, yeah.
They're amazingly stealthy, and yet elves can do that even better than hobbits. That says a lot, doesn't it?
That does say a lot. That's really cool. And I'm struck by the idea that, we know that elves are so in touch with Arda. Their life is Arda's. That's why they're quote unquote immortal, or have a serial longevity. They really belong in Arda. They have a connection to Arda that we as humans do not have. But hobbits do have it a little bit, even though they are closer related to men. They do have a little bit of that connection to nature, and I think that's related to this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Super cool.
Well, the next passage, ordinarily we take turns, and I would let you read the next one, but you called shotgun on the passage with the stars.
I did, yeah. So you had to move things around a little bit, and I appreciate your flexibility.
Oh, no problem. I've got another one of these beautiful landscape descriptions. I just wanted this to be read so badly that I felt like I didn't want to skip it and jump to the stars, just because there's something really, there's neat stuff here, even though there's not a lot to talk about. It's just a beautiful passage. So let yourself imagine this as I'm reading it, and enjoy. The woods on either side became denser. The trees were now younger and thicker. And as the lane went lower, running down into a fold of the hills, there were many deep breaks of hazel on the rising slopes at either hand. At last the elves turned aside from the path. A green ride lay almost unseen through the thickets on the right, and this they followed as it wound away back up the wooded slopes onto the top of a shoulder of the hills that stood out into the lower land of the river valley. Suddenly they came out of the shadow of the trees, and before them lay a wide space of grass, gray under the night. On 3 sides the woods pressed upon it, but eastward the ground fell steeply, and the tops of the dark trees growing at the bottom of the slope were below their feet. Beyond, the low lands lay dim and flat under the stars. Nearer at hand, a few lights twinkled in the village of Woodhall.
Wow.
Isn't that just evocative?
That is an amazing description.
Really can see this, and I can see the path leading off. Not even a path, like you said, just this ride, a green ride lay almost unseen. You can kind of see this little, almost natural path, if you will, going along the edge of this hill.
A barely defined path,
Yeah.
Natural path, that's a good phrase.
Yeah, and I mean, it's something that you wouldn't see unless you were looking very hard.
If you didn't know to look, right.
Exactly. And just the way they come out and into this wide space where the woods are surrounding you on 3 sides, but they fall away and you're above the trees that are growing on the slope beneath you. So you've got this unobstructed view. Oh, it must have been gorgeous.
Of these lights twinkling in the village. Yeah, it's beautiful. It's almost a little otherworldly to me. I don't know. It just kind of
a little fairy. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, definitely a little bit fairy or enchanted. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course we get yet more trees. Now we get the hazel trees. Of course, we've seen so many trees over the course of the last chapter that you'd have to see it over the last 3 episodes. But I've tried to call out all the different kinds that we've seen. So.
Yeah, that's true. We had we've had oaks, we've had hazels, we've had, what else do we have? We had
birches. I'd have to go back to the episode notes and see all the different kinds of trees.
But you're right. There have been so many. When I listen to these again, I should probably go back and try and note down all the ones that we've had. But we have not had
the larch. The larch. No, we have not.
And now, the larch.
Oh, man. Oh, goodness. All right. No larches, just the hazels this time.
Yep.
So they get there, and interestingly enough, they bring the hobbits, but then they ignore them. Hey, come to our party. Keep yourselves company.
Just hang out.
Exactly. Love
Yeah.
that.
At least they didn't ask him to set anything up,
No, that's true. At least, could you
Here, put this tablecloth over that.
Could you put out the punch bowl?
Yeah.
Pippin falls asleep.
Of course.
Not surprisingly.
No.
He's probably going to be the last one to wake up, too. But the passage after that is the one you begged to be allowed to read.
I did.
And I, in my graciousness, I, in my kindness.
You were so magnanimous to give me this.
I was like, I don't want to have to pronounce that word. You go ahead. That's actually what I said.
Yeah, exactly. Could be something I'll regret. But let's see how it goes. Away, high in the east, swung Remirath, the netted stars, and slowly above the mists red Borgil rose, glowing like a jewel of fire. Then, by some shift of airs, all the mist was drawn away like a veil. And there leaned up, as he climbed over the rim of the world, the swordsman of the sky, Menelvagor with his shining belt. The elves all burst into song. Suddenly, under the trees, a fire sprang up with a red light. "Come," the elves called to the hobbits. "Come, now is the time for speech and merriment." Pippin sat up and rubbed his eyes. He shivered. "There is a fire in the hall, and food for hungry guests," said an elf, standing before him.
Always nice to have that unnamed elf tell you that there's some food.
Yeah.
Is that what's the name that movie fans have given that one elf? Frodo's
Figwit.
Figwit, yeah.
Yeah.
Frodo's great. Who's this? Something like that. Yeah.
Right. Frodo is great. Who is that? Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Brett McKenzie, actually, the actor Brett McKenzie, half of Flight of the Conchords.
Yeah. That's right. So this is Figwit.
Yeah.
That's the way I'm picturing this. But anyway.
Yeah. You never want to wake up to find a strange elf just standing above you, honestly. I mean...
There's fire and food. I don't. I don't.
It's like, whoa, hey.
But I wouldn't mind waking up and seeing Remirath, the netted stars.
Oh.
And Menelvagor. Oh.
One of my favorite things about this passage, and one of my favorite things about really all the star passages in Tolkien's world, is that he describes them with such detail.
Yes.
And you can look into the sky at night and see the same stars that he mentions here. It's a connection to Tolkien's secondary world, and it reminds us that it is supposed to be our world. So I think it's worth spending a little time to talk about what stars these are.
Okay, I think it is.
In our sky. The first one, Remirath, the netted stars. So that's made up of the Sindarin roots Rem, which means mesh, and Mir, which means jewel, with the collective plural suffix af. So, netted stars. Most everyone we've read has figured out that this refers to the Pleiades. That's the star cluster, sometimes known as the Seven Sisters in the constellation of Taurus. Tolkien actually confirmed this in a vocabulary list that's published in Parma Eldalamberon 17. He actually translated Remirath in that as the netted jewels, Pleiades. So there you go.
Well, of course. There you go.
He's given us, that's a gimme.
That is a gimme. And this one's not too far from that. Borgil is derived from Sindarin bor, which means hot or red, and gil, which means star. And there's a whole lot of words that have that in it. I'm sure you recognize that. Now, Sean's got more on this in a bit, but it seems that opinions on this are split between Aldebaran, which is no relation to Alderaan, which got so hot it just disappeared. Or
so sense a great disturbance in the force.
There you go. So Aldebaran, not Alderaan. So it's either, people think it's either Aldebaran or Betelgeuse. Now, for reference, Aldebaran is like Pleiades in Taurus, whereas Betelgeuse is in Orion. And Ford Prefect is from a small planet in its vicinity and not from Guildford at all.
Well, and of course, if you say Betelgeuse 3 times, it appears in the model town in your attic.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, man. Wow, that's really digging deep. I haven't seen that movie in ages. Probably for
I just watched it a few days ago. It's funny.
Well, it's Halloween time, or it was a couple weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
Menelvagor, which is literally the swordsman of the heavens, is said by Tolkien himself to be the constellation Orion.
Yeah.
So this appears to be a Sindarin form of the Quenya name Menelmacar, which is what it's called in Chapter 3 of the Silmarillion.
Yeah, so we've got 2 very clear identifications, and then one of the star Borgil. That's you got a couple of options to choose from. Now, I'm a little bit of a backyard stargazer. I mean, beginner level. Don't ask me any
Mhm.
questions because I don't know what I'm doing. But I do have some. I do have some.
There's
Star
something
Chart.
I've learned over the course of 105 episodes. Don't ask Sean anything he doesn't know what he's doing.
No,
Come
he will say both an answer and I have no idea what I'm talking about.
on.
But no, I have some Star Chart apps on my phone, and if you have one, you
Yeah.
might want to open it up just to see exactly how these stars look to Frodo. If you don't have one, you can actually get them for free, so you might as well download one and try this. But
Sure.
at this time of year, which is early December, if you're in the northern hemisphere, these stars should be rising in the east right around sunset. So Taurus is going to rise first, and you'll see the Pleiades, Remirath, near the top of that constellation as it's rising, looking east. Aldebaran, if that's what Borgil is, that's the red star near the center of Taurus. And then Betelgeuse is the one in Orion. It's the right shoulder of the swordsman, basically, and that rises right after Taurus. So whether you believe Borgil is Aldebaran or Betelgeuse depends on how you interpret this passage. Either Borgil rises above the mist, and then the mist is drawn away, and you can see Menelvagor rising below it, closer to the horizon. In that case, Borgil is Aldebaran. Or the other option is Borgil is actually in Menelvagor, but it's the only star that's visible because the rest of the constellation is hidden behind the mist. And then when the mist is drawn away, then suddenly you can see the rest of Menelvagor, and that would make Borgil Betelgeuse. Betelgeuse.
Yeah. Or Betelgeuse. I'm not sure. Not 100%.
I'm not sure. I know.
I've heard both, actually.
I have heard both, too, but I'm just not going to say it a third time.
Well done, sir.
For what it's worth, Professor Christine Larson, who is the only person I know of to be called a Tolkienian astronomer by John Ratliff, she's claimed
that's a title of some distinction.
Isn't it? I know. I wish I could have that title, but I would have to go to school and study a lot more than I have. But
at least one or two of those subjects.
Right. In some professional capacity.
Preferably both, but yes.
Yeah. So Professor Larson has claimed a definitive identification of Borgil as Aldebaran, and she wrote about it in a 2005 article in Tolkien Studies. And she based this on, in her words, etymological, astronomical, and literary evidence. But even she concludes by saying one can never know with absolute certainty whether that's what Tolkien intended. So
it's a definitive identification, but not quite, is what we're saying.
Exactly. A definitive identification, but who knows if that's what Tolkien intended. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay. So it definitely is that.
It's like based on the data, it should be that, but who knows what Tolkien really meant. Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah. Fascinating, though.
It really is. And thank you for that, because that's a sidebar I would not have been able to get into. I've always wanted to be a little bit of one of those sort of, backyard star watchers. I've taken some really enjoyable nighttime photos where I do like long exposures to get the Milky Way and things like that.
Yeah, cool.
Fantastic stuff. But I'm just not. I know I'm no longer mathematically inclined enough to be good at that stuff. I used to be.
It's tough, yeah.
When I was young, but not anymore.
It's tough because I'll just get something lined up in my telescope, and it takes me so long to get it lined up that the Earth has moved.
the entire, it's morning.
Oh, there it is. And there it went. Okay,
and there's the sun.
Yeah.
And I got to go to sleep. Yeah,
right.
Exactly. That's my thing. I think the truth of the matter is now I'm just too old and I need to go to sleep.
It's hard to stay up that late. I know. It's like I want to take my son out there with my telescope, and he's in bed by sunset most nights. You know.
So. Well, maybe now that the time has changed, you might be able to get a chance.
Maybe so.
Now it's dark at least in where I'm at now. It's dark at like 5:30 or 6 now with the time change. The next couple of months are going to be, easy to get out.
That's true. I could give that a shot. Maybe we could go and take a look at some of these same constellations Frodo's looking at.
And you have places you can go where there's not a lot of light pollution.
Yeah. It's not easy, but I can. Okay.
I mean, for me, I have to drive several hours to get away from light pollution.
True. Yeah, and I could probably get there in like maybe 30. 30 to get to a really good place.
That's pretty nice.
Yeah.
So they end up in this party, and we're not going to read this description of the actual party hall, if you will, but it certainly is spectacular. So take your time to read that.
Mm-hmm.
We are going to observe.
It reminds me of Mirkwood. I have to point that out.
That's
the sawn
right.
rings of old trunks. Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. The sawn rings of old trunks once again. We talked before about the elves being, very in touch with nature, and they clearly are.
Mm-hmm.
But let's also be clear that they are sawing these trees down and sitting on the trunks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I need a seat over here. Well, let's just cut this tree down. I mean, I'm not saying they're cutting the trees down and wasting it. That would be very orc-like.
Right.
They're using the trees for something, for fires and, building whatever they're doing. But, the idea that they would never, cut a tree down is clearly false.
Right.
But I just thought that was an interesting observation. You're right. It totally reminded me of Mirkwood. And then we get this line about the poor fare. They're basically saying we're so sorry for this.
According to the elves, this is only poor fare. Yeah. Yeah.
But Frodo loves it. I mean, he says it's good enough for a birthday party. That's pretty high praise. He just had one not that long ago.
That's true.
So it must
and
be
we know those
something.
Bagginses, they throw the best birthday parties.
Oh, they do.
I mean, they go all out.
They do. Well, I'm going to go ahead and read a passage here that gives us, how we talked about earlier about the individual reactions of the hobbits to the arrival of the elves?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
We get a much more detailed description. I'm going to read these next 3 paragraphs about Pippin,
these are
Sam,
great,
and Frodo, and they really are. Pippin afterwards recalled little of either food or drink, for his mind was filled with the light upon the elf faces, and the sound of voices so various and so beautiful that he felt in a waking dream. But he remembered that there was bread surpassing the savor of a fair white loaf to one who is starving, and fruits sweet as wild berries and richer than the tended fruits of gardens. He drained a cup that was filled with a fragrant draught, cool as a clear fountain, golden as a summer afternoon. Sam could never describe in words, nor picture clearly to himself, what he felt or thought that night, though it remained in his memory as one of the chief events of his life. The nearest he ever got was to say, "Well, sir, if I could grow apples like that, I would call myself a gardener, but it was the singing that went to my heart, if you know what I mean." Frodo sat, eating, drinking, and talking with delight, but his mind was chiefly on the words spoken. He knew a little of the elf speech and listened eagerly. Now and again he spoke to those that served him and thanked them in their own language. They smiled at him and said, laughing, "Here is a jewel among hobbits." I love that.
That is so cool. And you're right. We get such a different reaction from each of the 3 hobbits,
So different, yeah.
Pippin is just, I love this. He felt in a waking dream. And it's just, it's all about just the food, the delicious food.
Sort of a sensory experience, isn't it?
Yes, the food and the beauty, the light of the elf faces, the sound of their voices,
the taste of the
delicious bread, this golden draft. Oh, it's great.
Golden as a summer afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that a beautiful passage? Just a wonderful little line, I should say.
I can actually taste that drink. I mean, it just, I don't know, it just kind of tastes like apples, like a really bright, fruity drink.
Maybe a sparkling, like a little Martinelli's.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, or like a light apple cider, like a crisp cider,
A little,
Oh, yeah.
Wonderful. And then Sam, of course, unable to put it in words. That's not surprising. Sam's strength is not words.
Yeah.
He's learned his letters, right? But he's not an eloquent writer like Frodo.
Right.
He is a rustic hobbit, a little more simple. And so it's not a surprise that he can't quite find a way to put it. But he finds a metaphor that works quite well, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm. He does. A metaphor that's close to him. Yeah.
Yes. It speaks of who he is.
If I could grow apples like that, I'd call myself a gardener. And just the power of that expression is, wow.
It really is.
It's so honest,
It is. Well, that's who Sam is. He is transparent to a fault. I mean, that's
that's true. That is true.
He says what's on his mind. He says what he means and means what he says. That's Sam for you.
Yeah.
And that's an admirable trait, really.
Yeah.
Frodo, he's focused on the words. It's for him. It's a language thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. He knows enough of the language to understand a little bit. He can listen. He can thank them in his own, in their own tongue. He's a little bit more at home. I think I said this earlier. He just seems like he's a little bit more in his element, and
certainly more than his friends. Yeah,
certainly more than his friends. And he's kind of winning over the elves with it. Here is a jewel among hobbits. He is truly an exceptional hobbit. We've talked about this a couple of times, and we'll be talking about it a lot more, I'm sure.
Yeah. They're not being sarcastic here. I mean, I think
not at all. No,
a pleasure for them to find that a hobbit is able to speak their language.
Yeah,
I know when I went to Oxford and I was able to speak their language, people thought it was wonderful. I don't travel internationally much, so it was a real pleasant surprise to know that I could speak the language.
Yeah. Even though you probably didn't speak it to their satisfaction.
Oh, no, I definitely didn't speak it to their satisfaction. I'm sure I used, why am I standing in line?
Some aluminum foil. Oh, yeah, why am I standing as opposed to queuing?
Yes, exactly. And what's that truck doing? Not a lorry. Yeah, no.
Right.
No, I kid.
You didn't ask anybody to get the spanner out of the boot?
Get the spanner out? No, I did not. Well, before we embarrass ourselves or myself any further, we should probably go ahead and move on to this conversation between Frodo and Gildor. I actually have you reading the next little bit, if you could pick that up.
Okay, yeah. So they're talking, right? Frodo's got some time with Gildor, and he's just asking him about what's going on, in the wide world outside the Shire. And then I'll pick up there. At last, Frodo asked the question that was nearest to his heart. "Tell me, Gildor, have you ever seen Bilbo since he left us?" Gildor smiled. "Yes," he answered. "Twice. He said farewell to us on this very spot, but I saw him once again, far from here." He would say no more about Bilbo, and Frodo fell silent. "You do not ask me or tell me much that concerns yourself, Frodo," said Gildor. "But I already know a little, and I can read more in your face and in the thought behind your questions. You are leaving the Shire, and yet you doubt that you will find what you seek or accomplish what you intend, or that you will ever return. Is not that so?" "It is," said Frodo. "But I thought my going was a secret, known only to Gandalf and my faithful Sam." He looked down at Sam, who was snoring gently. "The secret will not reach the enemy from us," said Gildor. "The enemy?" said Frodo. "Then you know why I am leaving the Shire?"
And so I'm going to go ahead and have you stop there, even though that does seem like it's the middle of the conversation, just because there's already so much to talk about.
Oh, yeah.
We've got, Gildor's knowledge that Frodo is leaving, his doubts about his success. Really interesting stuff. But I love the Bilbo bits.
I just noticed this when I read it just now. Gildor can read in the thought behind Frodo's questions. So there's more of that Osanwe.
Oh, you are right.
Very clear statement
behind your questions.
Yeah.
Very clearly. And, he's a powerful elf. He is a Noldor, but he's not Galadriel. This isn't like
right.
It's not limited to the most powerful elves, apparently.
Right.
Though Tauriel probably doesn't have it. I'm just sorry, folks.
Probably not. No, she's
maybe
more
she did, because that's how she knew that Keeley really loved her.
Maybe, yeah.
I'm sorry,
yeah. I don't know why you had to go there.
I just
we're having a good time.
We are, and then
we're talking about stuff
that.
We like. You had,
Sorry.
Why?
Forgive me. Will you forgive me, please?
I'm
begging you.
I will. Of course, I'll always forgive you. You know that. But no, that essay, that Osanwe Kenta essay, has a lot of little information about the more powerful mind and the less powerful mind, and how these connections can be made. So again, I'll just kind of refer people to that.
Well, yeah, and obviously, the more powerful the minds, the clearer the connection.
Right. Sure.
Of course. Gandalf and Galadriel communicating, they could be talking about architectural plans down to the 16th of an inch or to a millimeter, and everything would get across.
Everything would get
perfectly.
Translated perfectly. Yeah.
It could be a legal contract, with paragraph after paragraph of legalese, and it would get there right. On the other hand, you have the song and the hobbits hearing it, Frodo hearing it,
probably
that
hearing
way.
all kinds of different ways, different words, and getting images, getting the gist of the song, maybe getting different degrees of the gist, but not getting actual words,
but not the detail.
Exactly.
Right. Exactly.
And again, Gildor can read into Frodo's thought, but he can't. He's not reading Frodo's mind.
He reads more,
directly.
but he can't tell. Oh, you're going to Rivendell.
Right.
Oh, you have the ring with you.
Oh, you have the one ring. Oh, there's a one ring. Oh, okay. So it's not.
Right.
It's not all that. It's just
no.
It's more of a.
He knows there's more.
A feeling. Yeah.
But it's specifically in the thought. You're right.
Yeah.
But you know what? I also love the beginning of this. The question nearest Frodo's heart was about Bilbo, as it should be. That's so sweet. That's such a tender moment.
It is. Yeah. And it doesn't surprise me one bit.
No, not at all. You would expect that. That would be the first thing on his mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad Gildor was able to give him a partially
A
satisfactory
little bit of
answer.
information, yeah.
Yeah, not as much as I would have liked. Like, well, what do you
But
mean
we've
you saw
seen
him a
him.
second time far from here?
We saw him here, and we saw him somewhere else.
Yeah, that's
hint,
helpful.
Hint.
Yeah.
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, say no more.
Rhymes with Livendell. Oh, goodness. But Gildor doesn't know the reason the enemy's involved, right? I mean, we're not going to read that paragraph, but he knows that
he knows that he is.
Right, but he doesn't
know why. Yep.
So then Frodo, I'm going to go ahead and pick up here where Frodo asks a very important question. What are the Black Riders? Has Gandalf told you nothing? Nothing about such creatures? Then I think it is not for me to say more, lest terror should keep you from your journey. For it seems to me that you have set out only just in time. If indeed you are in time, you must now make haste, and neither stay nor turn back, for the Shire is no longer any protection to you.
Mm.
There's another short. We've done that tonight, haven't we? We've had
a lot of short passages, a little back and forth. It's been nice.
Yeah, it is. It's good.
Yeah.
This is interesting, isn't it?
It is. It's definitely a change from early versions of the tale.
Mm-hmm.
In some of the early drafts that you get in the History of Middle Earth, Gildor had a lot more information about what was going on.
Yeah.
Gildor actually asked Frodo, who was then called Bingo. He actually asked him if he had Bilbo's ring with him.
Yeah.
And
by the way, do you have the ring with you?
Which tells us that Gildor actually knew about the ring in that version.
Right, in that version.
Which there's no reason to believe that he does in this one, and we'll get into that a little bit later.
Yep.
When Bingo is sort of taken aback by this, and he says, yes, he does, Gildor replied, then I will add this last word. If a rider approaches or pursues you hard, do not use the ring to escape from his search. I guess that the ring will help him more than you. And then after Bingo is understandably confused by this, Gildor goes on to say, I will answer only this. The ring came in the beginning from the enemy and was not made to delude his servants.
Oh.
So Gildor gives Frodo
a
a ton of information. I mean, he knows the history of the ring. He knows exactly why the ring wraiths are on or after Frodo or Bingo at the time. He knows Bilbo had the ring. I mean, he knows just a ton of stuff, and that's all gone here. Gildor doesn't know as much.
He doesn't have that knowledge. Yeah,
and I kind of like that more. I do too. Like where it ends up. I think
I don't want everybody in there. Exactly. I don't want everybody and their brother to be knowing about the ring.
Right.
It doesn't fit. It doesn't fit with. Frankly, it doesn't fit with Sauron not knowing if it weren't for Gollum. Right. The idea that there's so few people that are aware that the One Ring is still in existence.
Right.
For Gildor to know that just doesn't make any sense.
If everybody knew about the ring and knew where it was and knew its history, it would be very hard to accomplish the quest that they're about to set out on.
Exactly.
Because so much of that relies on Sauron not knowing who's got it, what they're doing with it. Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah. Well, I've got you reading another short little passage here that has some nice little tidbits in it.
Okay. I knew that danger lay ahead, of course, but I did not expect to meet it in our own shire. Can't a hobbit walk from the water to the river in peace? But it is not your own shire, said Gildor. Others dwelt here before hobbits were, and others will dwell here again when hobbits are no more. The wide world is all about you. You can fence yourselves in, but you cannot forever fence it out.
There is a lot there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not a lot in terms of time, but it's not like we're going to spend 20 minutes on this point. But there's something really significant there. It does remind me, though, first of the prologue. There's a passage there that I think is really relevant that points to this not being their own shire. We learned there in the prologue that the shire had long been deserted when the hobbits entered it. It had before been well tilled, and there the king had once had many farms, cornlands, vineyards, and woods. So, of course, it wasn't their own shire.
Yeah, lots of people had lived there before they had.
That's absolutely right. And Hammond and Scull also point out that Tolkien understood this very well. They say, Tolkien lived close to a countryside in which the passage of successive peoples was marked with stone monuments, burial mounds, Roman roads, village churches, railways, and the like. He was aware that a land can have a long history, and that in the past, each wave of invaders or immigrants usually displaced its predecessor.
Mm.
We talked earlier about how writers write from their experience.
Yeah.
And this is that. He has this experience, this understanding of successive people groups living in the same land, but not being the same people.
Yeah.
And, this was not originally a hobbit land.
Well, I dare say a lot of people in Europe have that experience. And it's something that I think is lost on us as American readers to some extent, because...
Well, to some extent. I mean, I think...
Nothing here is that old. And if there's a city here, chances are it was founded in... Very good chance that it was founded in the last 100 years.
Yeah, that's true.
And if not that, then it was at least founded within, the last few hundred years by people who probably spoke the same language you're speaking now.
Yeah.
Who had a sense of identity that's not too far off of what you have now.
True.
And that's got to be very different, for especially a place like England or Britain.
That's the thing. I mean, I was thinking of Native Americans and how each wave of invaders or immigrants have displaced its predecessor, and obviously that happened here.
And we certainly displaced them.
Right, but you're right. It's to draw that distinction, the fact that we're not going to come upon a city that was founded 600 years ago, that is now
right.
A new city is built on top of it.
Right,
it's a little different in that regard than it is in England, where you have, Roman ruins built upon, Celtic ruins, and then. Anglo-Saxon, built on top of that, and then Danish,
and a church
Vikings built on top of that.
Yeah, and churches built with stones that were reclaimed from one of the ruins.
Right. It's a different,
it's a much
experience. More intimate experience, really, with those layers and layers of of various invaders and immigrants. Right.
That's a good way of saying it. And I wouldn't mean to imply that we as Americans cannot have that experience. It's just different for us.
It's just different.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's, I wanted to make sure we got that, cleared up. But
I think it's good for us as Americans to be able to read something like this and, think about places like this.
That's true.
It's a great observation. I'm glad you brought it up.
No, I am too, even if I kind of stumbled and fumbled around in trying to talk about it.
It's all right. It's what we do.
Yeah, it is. So Gildor ends up telling him that he should continue with the plan that Gandalf had advised. And I'm going to go ahead and pick up shortly after that. He says, "But if you desire clearer counsel, you should ask Gandalf. I do not know the reason for your flight, and therefore I do not know by what means your pursuers will assail you. These things Gandalf must know. I suppose that you will see him before you leave the Shire?" "I hope so, but that is another thing that makes me anxious. I have been expecting Gandalf for many days. He was to have come to Hobbiton at the latest 2 nights ago, but he's never appeared. Now I am wondering what can have happened. Should I wait for him?" Gildor was silent for a moment. "I do not like this news," he said at last. "That Gandalf should be late does not bode well. But it is said, do not meddle in the affairs of wizards, for they are subtle and quick to anger. The choice is yours, to go or wait." "And it is also said," answered Frodo, "go not to the elves for counsel, for they will say both no and yes." I love that.
That's so awesome.
I mean, that's such an iconic line, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, we've even turned it into go not to the podcast for counsel, for they will say both no and yes.
We will say both no and yes.
And we do frequently.
and we know I'm subtle and quick to anger, so there
yes, you are. Yes, you are.
I've heard that
you're not.
phrase
You're so not.
No, I know. Do not meddle in the affairs of dragons, for you are tasty and good with ketchup, or something like that.
Where have I heard that? I have heard that.
I don't know.
Somewhere.
It was some sort of, like a meme sort of thing, I would imagine.
Yeah.
But yeah, pretty funny stuff.
But yeah, two great iconic quotes.
Right back to back.
Right back to back.
Brilliant proverbs. Just really good stuff.
Yeah.
And how would Frodo know that? He must have learned that from Bilbo or possibly Gandalf.
I'm guessing Bilbo. It sounds like the kind of thing Bilbo would say.
Yeah, it does. It does, doesn't it? So there's not much more there. I just wanted I actually wanted those lines. I let you talk about the stars. I wanted to talk about
the
affairs
Proverbs.
of wizards. And that's right. I wanted the Proverbs. So now that we've read the Proverbs, I'm actually going to have you read the next paragraph.
All right. In response to Frodo's zinger.
Mm-hmm.
"Is it indeed?" laughed Gildor. "Elves seldom give unguarded advice, for advice is a dangerous gift, even from the wise to the wise, and all courses may run ill. But what would you? You have not told me all concerning yourself, and how then shall I choose better than you? But if you demand advice, I will for friendship's sake give it. I think you should now go at once, without delay. And if Gandalf does not come before you set out, then I also advise this: do not go alone. Take such friends as are trusty and willing. Now you should be grateful, for I do not give this counsel gladly. The elves have their own labors and their own sorrows, and they are little concerned with the ways of hobbits or of any other creatures upon earth. Our paths cross theirs seldom, by chance or purpose. In this meeting there may be more than chance, but the purpose is not clear to me, and I fear to say too much. Once again, there's a lot there. I mean,
that's why I only had one paragraph set out for you.
Yeah, man, advice is a dangerous gift.
It is,
and all courses may run ill. Yeah,
and then he points out the obvious. You haven't given me enough information.
Given me all the information. How am I supposed to give you counsel that's better than anything you could come up with, since you've got all the facts? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then, I mean, do not go alone. Take friends you can trust and who are willing to go with you. And I think the last one, the big one, is this reminder that elves have their own stuff going on. They've got their own labors. They've got their own sorrows. They are not concerned with what hobbits are doing or with what other creatures are doing. You know,
on the surface, that seems a little
selfish.
I mean, doesn't that seem to you a little selfish?
It does on the surface, yeah. But then when you think about, we talked about this a few episodes ago, the fact that elves are leaving. You know, this is that transition of power we've talked about. Elves are leaving Middle-earth, and they are handing the reins to men. And
they're
hobbits.
Supposed to fade. It's their job.
This is their destiny. This is what Iluvatar wants for them, is to fade. And so it is. This is not really their fight, and it really is something that men and hobbits are going to have to take on themselves.
Yeah.
But then Gildor also points out, and I know you want to talk about this.
You bet. Of course I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. This idea that our paths cross theirs seldom, by chance or purpose. In this meeting, there may be more than chance, but the purpose is not clear to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The recognition that this meeting may not be chance alone. I think we've talked about this. Chance, if chance there be, if chance exists, you know. I think this is simply a reminder of Providence, again, the hand of Iluvatar. We're going to see these often, but I want to tease the next two that jump out at me as a result of this one.
Okay.
First, when rescued by Tom Bombadil, he tells the hobbits, just chance brought me then, if chance you call it. And then we have Elrond's observation that the council members have come and are here met in this very nick of time, by chance as it may seem. Now, the reason I brought that one up is because of how he then expands upon that, and I think this applies to so many of these chance moments.
Mm-hmm.
So the way Elrond responds is to say, yet it is not so, talking about chance.
Mm-hmm.
Believe rather that it is so ordered. And that's so important, because that is really what's going on here. It is so ordered. It is fate, or not fate, but it is providence. Providence is a better way of putting that word, because I think people have this notion of fate as sort of being kind of the random chance that happens, just leave it up to fate. No, that kind of fate isn't this kind of fate. Tolkien, when he talks about fate, Tolkien is talking about the music. He's talking about the ultimate destiny of an individual character like Frodo, or the ultimate destiny of an entire race like the Elves. That's their fate. That's different than the way I think modern folks kind of hear the word fate. So I like the word providence. And that's really what's going on here.
I think fate means a lot of things to a lot of different people, but true. Providence is probably more on the nose for, what Tolkien's talking about. I think that's fair.
Right. Yeah. We're talking about the hand of Iluvatar here. We talked about this, right? Mini catastrophe. That is what saved Frodo.
Let's not forget
that. Go back to that moment. Without that mini catastrophe, this meeting isn't even happening. So, the story's over, actually, without that mini catastrophe.
Right, exactly.
So, done, the end. Thank you very much.
So right there, that was... Yeah, exactly.
Very clear. Yeah.
Very clearly. So, but then there's other components to this as well. Frodo needs to have this meeting with Gildor. Frodo needs to have this conversation with Gildor right now.
He really does.
And we may not know why for some time.
Yeah, but he does need that advice to go,
Yep.
not to wait, to take friends. I mean, and all of those are
True,
important,
yeah.
right? I mean,
That's true.
that's
Yeah.
the importance of fellowship right there.
Yeah.
And then because I am a reading hog, I am going to take the rest of the chapter.
I swear, you give me one passage about stars, and then you just take like this whole last.
I'm just a taker, man.
You are,
I'm
man.
just a taker. All right. I am deeply grateful, said Frodo, but I wish you would tell me plainly what the Black Riders are. If I take your advice, I may not see Gandalf for a long while, and I ought to know what is the danger that pursues me. Is it not enough to know that they are servants of the enemy? Answered Gildor. Flee them. Speak no words to them. They are deadly. Ask no more of me. But my heart forebodes that, ere all is ended, you, Frodo, son of Drogo, will know more of these fell things than Gildor Inglorion. May Elbereth protect you. But where shall I find courage? Asked Frodo. That is what I chiefly need. Courage is found in unlikely places, said Gildor. Be of good hope. Sleep now. In the morning we shall have gone, but we will send our messages through the lands. The wandering companies shall know of your journey, and those that have power for good shall be on the watch. I name you Elf-friend, and may the stars shine upon the end of your road. Seldom have we had such delight in strangers, and it is fair to hear words of the ancient speech from the lips of other wanderers in the world. Frodo felt sleep coming upon him even as Gildor finished speaking. I will sleep now, he said, and the elf led him to a bower beside Pippin, and he threw himself upon a bed and fell at once into a dreamless slumber.
Oh, man.
That is a rich moment.
That really is. What a great, happy, calm, and, comfortable moment for Frodo to get a little bit of sleep, a dreamless slumber,
The rest that he needs.
Yeah.
I love that moment about courage. I think that's...
Courage is what I need now.
Isn't it?
And
Gildor's response of,
courage is found in unlikely
places.
So be of good hope.
He still didn't answer the question.
No.
But
no, but you know what? I think be of good hope goes with it. If you
it is. It does.
If you keep yourself in good hope, you'll find your courage. Don't worry. Courage will be out there.
And besides, how could you answer that question? What, aisle 7? I mean, it's not something that is a tangible that you can go...
It's right next to the toilet paper.
Right, exactly. You can't just go grab it off the shelf. I mean,
right.
You find it when you need it.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
And it is going to be in unlikely places.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right. The of good hope is tied directly to the courage, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. I think it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we get the Elf-friend
Frodo
again.
being named Elf-friend. Yeah.
Yeah. And that lovely, may the stars shine upon the end of your road. I love that.
So great.
That's just a wonderful little way to
wrap up the chapter.
Like a blessing. Yeah. Well, I was just thinking of it's a...
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, his conversation, it's like this little... It's like a blessing, It's
it is. Yeah. Yeah,
it's got that sort of concept.
It's got that kind of sound. It seems a very literal benediction.
That's the word I was looking for.
A very literal wish for blessings and for goodness to come his way. Yeah,
and of course because it's the stars. I mean, the Elbereth is who they revere more than anyone.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not necessarily more than Iluvatar, but we don't really hear about the elves in Iluvatar. In terms of the Valar, Varda is the one. And
right.
So for him to say, may the stars, may Varda herself, as he's already said, may Elbereth protect you, but now may Varda's creation shine upon the end of your road.
Right.
Yeah, very much a benediction. That's the word I was looking for. Thank you.
That's important and that's powerful.
It really is. Well, folks, that wraps it up for Three is Company. We do hope you'll join us again next week, though, for our 5th quarterly Questions After Nightfall.
Have we been doing this for that long now?
I know. I was like, wait a minute.
Wow.
5th? That's not...
I know. Well, anyway, before we wrap up, we do want to take a minute to remind you about the Fellowship of the Podcast. That's our family of supporters over at Patreon. We are this close, and you can't see my fingers, but we are this close, trust me, to our next goal of setting up a Discord server, which is going to give our patrons a chance to listen in live during a recording. Plenty of opportunity to laugh at our mistakes and our bad jokes, not to mention a sneak peek at an upcoming episode.
I think I know what I'll be doing over the holidays, setting up a Discord channel.
Yes, you will.
Our patrons will enjoy that. I'm not sure that we will, but that might have been a mistake in retrospect. But if you think that you'll enjoy laughing at us, then be sure to visit patreon.com/prancingponypod. And when you join at the Gift of Gondor level or higher, you'll also get access to some pretty cool stuff, exclusive content, like a full-length bonus episode every quarter,
Yep.
along with short postscripts to these chapter-based episodes.
That's right. And if you're in the market for a new Tolkien book, please check out the official library pages at our website, theprancingponypodcast.com, where we've put together a set of links for our listeners to all the Tolkien books we've ever mentioned on the show. And if you wouldn't mind posting a review on iTunes, we'd really appreciate that. It actually increases our visibility. That means more new listeners. It gives us more questions into Barlaman's bag. Just more of everything we love, discussion on social media, and just have kind of continuing to grow this Tolkien community.
Absolutely. And don't forget to share us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, wherever you hang out. Maybe, I don't know, some of you might hang out in some shady places, but if it's a good place and there are Tolkien fans there, then please tell them about our show.
There you go.
Now with that, it is time to see what old Barlaman has in the mailbag for us. Sean?
All right. Well, our first one comes to us from Don in Vancouver Island, British Columbia. Don says, the word elf has been around for at least a millennium. Therefore, the word and or concept was of daily importance. One of the euphemisms for elf was the white folk. One of the names for Britain was Albion, Alba being based on the Indo-European word for white. Most Englishmen of Tolkien's generation believed in fairies. When I follow these breadcrumbs, Don says, I come to the real question. Is there any evidence that Tolkien actually believed in elves? Or did he just want to believe? That's a cool question, Don. Thank you for that. Mm-hmm. In our most recent patron-exclusive special on race in Middle-earth, I actually did talk a little bit about the possible etymological connection between the word elf and these Indo-European words for white, like Latin albus. And that may actually be related to, why they're commonly described as fair or light. I mean, that's one theory, at least. The etymology of elf is very uncertain. There's a lot of different ideas about it.
True. Now, for those of you who have not had a chance to hear that special, we have some good news. Thanks to the generosity of our patrons who have agreed to allow us to release that to the main feed, we will be releasing that episode as a main feed episode sometime early next year. But if you want to hear it now, or if you want to hear any of the other exclusives that we've done, and we've done some fun ones, come join us on Patreon.
And we'd love to have you there. Now, there's also some disagreement on the etymology of Albion as the name for Britain, but I got to say the theory that I've heard the most is that Albion may have been a reference to the White Cliffs of Dover. Think about this, as maybe for Celtic and Roman settlers, the first people coming to the island probably would have come via the Strait of Dover because that's where it's closest to the continent. And so they would have seen those White Cliffs first. And I think the theory is that might have given it the name of Albion. But enough of that. I mean, that's kind of just me word nerding while we think about what Don's real question is, right? So why don't you go ahead and start with that one?
Sure. Well, as for whether Tolkien really believed in elves, I don't know. Who are we to say what he believed or didn't believe? But
yeah, fair.
There doesn't seem to be any reason to conclude that Tolkien believed in elves any more than any other educated person of the early 20th century would. Now, I'm not sure that we here at the Prancing Pony have much to go on about what Englishmen believed at the time. I mean, we are old, but we're not early 20th century old. Almost. But
that's fair. It feels that way sometimes.
It does, doesn't it? We do know that Tolkien often talked about elves, or rather fairies, as if they were real. For example, near the beginning of On Fairy Stories, Tolkien talks about fairies as though they're real when he says things like, the word supernatural can hardly be applied to fairies. He says it's because they are natural, far more natural than man. He also talks about fairy and drama as those plays which, according to abundant records, the elves have often presented to men. And then there's times when he actually seems to leave it open to discussion. He says things like, if elves are true and really exist independently of our tales about them, then this also is certainly true. Elves are not primarily concerned with us, nor we with them. Our fates are sundered, and our paths seldom meet. Now, really, when you look at context, though, it seems very clear he's speaking tongue-in-cheek. I'm not compelled in any way to believe that Tolkien actually believes in literal elves, any more than, say, he believed that he really translated a Red Book of Westmarch.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I do tend to agree with that. I mean, he also talks in On Fairy Stories about fairy or the perilous realm as if it's a real place. But, if you look a little deeper, I think I actually went and looked in some of the supplemental essays in the critical edition of Smith of Wotton Major that Verlin Flieger edited. Mm-hmm. There's some essays in there about that story and about fairy. And he does talk again, he talks about fairy and he talks about elves, but he does clearly call them imaginary creatures.
Mm-hmm.
He speaks of fairy as a place one can visit, but again, in the imagination.
Right.
And I think he was very well acquainted with it as that kind of place, as a place you could visit in your mind. And I think you can tell that by reading Smith or reading on fairy stories.
True. And I'm going to bring in something from letter 155 to Naomi Mitchison here. Now, it doesn't talk about elves specifically, but it does have some relevance to this discussion. We've quoted it a few times before. This is that letter that talks about magic and the two kinds of magic that we've talked about recently, magia and goetia. Now, before he introduces these concepts, Tolkien says, I do not intend to involve myself in any debate whether magic in any sense is real or really possible in the world. Now, Tolkien isn't trying to say that magic is real in the primary world. He's just using it as a component of his secondary world. I suspect he'd say the same thing about elves.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. And I think it's probably less important to him whether elves really exist in real life than it is for him to write a secondary world where their existence can be believed. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, I think that's the point of a secondary world anyway, is to subcreate a world in which the incredible can be credible, right?
Absolutely. He said it himself. Anyone inheriting the fantastic device of human language can say the green sun. Many can then imagine or picture it, but that is not enough. To make a secondary world inside which the green sun will be credible, commanding secondary belief, will probably require labor and thought, and will certainly demand a special skill, a kind of elvish craft. So there you have it. I mean, it's all about subcreation, secondary world, believability, inner consistency of reality, all of that. That's what it is.
Yeah.
It's not whether or not elves really exist. It's creating the world in which they could.
I think so. And I think bringing in that letter about, not trying to prove that magic really exists, I think that was really a good find, because that's not really what it's about for him. It's just about creating that secondary world. So
that's exactly right.
Agreed. Well, we've got one more here. Kim in Nebraska wrote to us recently with this one. She said, given that Gildor, one of the Noldor, still claims fealty to the House of Finrod, surely he would have known about the Rings of Power. Do you think if Frodo had told him he carried the One Ring, that Gildor would have accompanied Frodo to Rivendell? I know he says the paths of elves and the rest of the peoples of Middle-earth rarely cross, but if elves like Glorfindel were keen on aiding Frodo, would Gildor have done more if he had known more?
I don't know. That's a good question. And we have talked about the lack of clarity surrounding Gildor's connection to the House of Finrod or Finarfin.
Sure, yeah.
But it does seem that he's a Noldo from the First Age. However, I wouldn't be so quick to assume that Gildor knew about the Rings of Power. I mean, yeah, there's the fact that he did it in an early draft, but the fact is that was removed, which makes me think that Tolkien decided, I don't want him to know these things. Now, in the final text, he knows about ring wraiths, and that makes sense because the Witch King and others of the ring wraiths, they were combatants in wars earlier in the Third Age. But he also says, I do not know for what reason the enemy is pursuing you. And he certainly didn't know that the ring wraiths were present in the Shire until his group encountered the hobbits.
That's
now,
true.
If he knew about the ring wraiths and the One Ring, I think he'd have probably figured out why they were out in the Shire instead of holed up in Minas Morgul. But I don't think he knew.
I think you're right. And I would add to that something Elrond says at the beginning of that committee meeting, the Council of Elrond.
I'm hearing Tom Shippey's voice again. I love that.
Of course, yep. Elrond says, now therefore things shall be openly spoken that have been hidden from all but a few until this day. Things that have been hidden from even the people at the council, because we find out as we read that chapter that most of the people there at the council are hearing this stuff for the first time.
That's right.
Now, obviously, you got to think Elrond would invite his chief advisors to the council. So, look at the elves who are there, folks like Erestor and Glorfindel. They were very important. They were probably Elrond's chief advisors. I can't help noticing that Gildor is not at the council. So
good point.
I kind of have to conclude that despite, being of the House of Finrod, he seems to be a lower ranking vassal of Elrond.
Sure.
And so if Erestor and Glorfindel were just learning things about the One Ring, it kind of seems unlikely to me that Gildor would have known anything about it. How would he know something that,
that
they're probably just learning? Yeah. And maybe not Glorfindel, maybe more Erestor, but still, everybody there at that council was learning a lot of new things. As you said earlier in this episode, this stuff wasn't common knowledge, even among pretty wise people.
That's right.
As for whether he would have helped if Frodo had told him anything about it, I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, if he didn't know anything about the ring, he probably would have just had a lot of questions.
Right.
And I kind of think he probably would have still told Frodo to just wait for Gandalf, trying to get Gandalf's advice, because he would know, Gildor would be wise enough to know he can't give an informed answer because there's just too much he doesn't know.
That's true. I mean, he'd have to know everything. He'd
Yeah.
have to have been privy to the entire conversation that Gandalf and Frodo had in the last chapter,
Right.
for him to be able to offer any sort of help.
Right.
There you go. Well, folks, that wraps it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Now, please be sure to join us again next week when many, many listeners will make it their goal to stump the hosts.
Yay! That's right. That means next time it's questions after nightfall.
Yep.
Folks, thanks again for listening, and thank you for making our common room on Facebook such a fun place to spend time. We want all of you to be a part of this conversation, and it does not stop when the episode ends. So you can see the comments, questions, corrections, and more on Facebook at The Prancing Pony Podcast, on Twitter at Prancing Pony Pod, and on Instagram at Prancing Pony Pod.
And a very special thank you to our patrons at the Kierdance contributions here. Those are DeMay in Alaska, James in Virginia, Tamsin in Minnesota, Emily in Texas, and Chad in Texas. We really want to thank all of you.
Make sure you don't miss any episodes of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Subscribe to the show through iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app.
And one last thing, as always, don't forget to send your thoughts, comments, and most of all, your best examples of ambiguous elven counsel to Parliament at theprancingponypodcast.com. We'll try to get them into our next show. Well, however long we've had is still far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners. Until next time.
Farewell, friends.